What's going on, everyone? This is Cadman Cycling. Today we'll review 4 quick tips on how to win a short Zwift race. And we'll go ahead and just get started here since 2 of the tips come at the start of the race. The first one is get a good warm-up in. For these short races, it's important to have a high heart rate when you start. Mine is close to 150. I probably started my warm-up about 20 to 25 minutes before this race, just because the start will be so fast and the heart rate will stay elevated for the entire race. So tip 1, warm up. Tip 2, start fast. So out of the gate, this is a small race in terms of the C category, but all riders are visible. So what that means is I can draft off of riders that are A and B that I'm not necessarily competing against, but will help me gain ground on the other C riders. So I have my watts up 350. Even when I started, it was around 400, just to make sure I can get a quick jump off the line. And immediately here, I find myself in a group of a lot of B's and A's. So even just a tenth of a mile into this race, I'm racing against, I think it was 7 different C riders, so not a large group at all. But just by starting quickly, I've almost already guaranteed myself a podium spot in just a 5-mile race because I started quickly. This group that I'm in already has a pretty big gap on the group behind us. So as long as I can stick with them, not even for the whole race, but just the longer that I stick with them, the more of a gap I'll gain on everyone behind me. So if I look at the composition of this group currently, it's kind of all over the place. I can see there's one other C rider in here with me, but there's only that one other rider. So all the other C's we've already gapped. There are 2 D riders, there's a few A riders and a few B riders. And again, the goal here is, in the end, I'm just racing against the other C riders. So it's important to utilize the draft of those A's and B's, but at the end of the day, I'm really just paying attention to where those other C's are. So we're not even a mile into the race, and it's a fast start, but that's to be expected. Only 5-mile race. For those who have raced at Innsbruck before, I'm sure you know exactly what the leg snapper is. This is an ultimately very flat course, just with one, not even a big climb, but just a punchy climb that probably takes about a minute of high elevation kind of up out of the saddle. And especially in such a short race like this, that climb is where the final standings are going to be decided. It happens, I think it's with about 1.5 miles left in the race. But until then, it'll be a very flat course. So as long as we stick with this group, we can move pretty fast through this race. So tip 1, decent warm-up. That's done ahead of time before the race. Tip 2 was a fast start. At this point, I've started fast so I can get with this front group. I actually did a previous video, I'll link it in the description below, I tried a different Zwift strategy. I tried to start slow, find a group kind of halfway through the race, and then see if we could start pushing and gain ground on the groups ahead of us. And it didn't work that well, kind of to ruin it if you haven't seen it. But it's really just the way Zwift works is you need to start fast. If you want to win races, you kind of just have to put in the watts ahead of time and try to recover as much as you can in the middle of the race. But it's really important to get on that front group as early as you can. So this is where we'll jump into the 3rd tip on how to win these short Zwift races. And this is really just be smart during the middle of the race. So stay on wheels as much as you can. You don't want to be spending time on the front of the pack if you don't have to. Otherwise, everyone behind you is putting in more or less effort than you are, since you're pushing wind on the front of the pack. But also be smart, especially in these races where all different groups and categories are visible. It's important to be smart and kind of use riders in groups and categories above you to your advantage. And this is what I mean by that. I'm currently in a group of a few B's and A's, so I'm not really racing against them, but I am utilizing their draft to try to gain ground on any C's that are ahead of me, or build my gap on any C's that are behind me. So it's important to use the riders in categories above you kind of as an extra draft, but at the same time, you have to be smart about it. You really don't want to be burning matches that you don't have to, just to stick with riders that at the end of the race, you're not even racing against. So the way I look at it is, if I'm putting out a comfortable effort and able to stick with this group, I will, because I know I can go faster in this larger group. But if I do see a few A riders or a few B riders to start to really push it on the front and start to gap me, I won't necessarily put in that extra dig to try to catch up to them. I'll kind of just let them go off the front, because I know that my energy is better saved to race against the other C riders. So that's exactly what I'm doing here. I'm feeling pretty good. This race wasn't quite as hard as I was expecting it to be, being just 5.5 miles long. My heart rate's high at 185, but I really didn't expect to see my watts ever go below 200 on this course. But definitely during this middle point, when we're in this large group, we're moving at a good speed, but the watts really weren't crazy high. And I think part of that is because of the leg snapper. Everyone's kind of just taking it easy until we get to that final climb that will really decide the end of the race. So here, overall in this race, we have 32 riders, and that's across all categories. I'm currently sitting in 5th, 6th place. So that's actually pretty good. That means there's only a couple groups or a couple riders ahead of us, and those are all A and B riders. In this group right here, there's one A, one other C along with me. There's a D rider with us, and then a few B riders. So currently, in terms of the Cat C standings, it's me and this other rider fighting for first. And then on the right-hand side, we can see there's a few other C riders behind us. So there's one solo C rider 10 seconds behind. And then there's kind of a group of 3 C riders, like 25 to 30 seconds behind. So as long as we stay with this pretty big group, it's really down to me and this other C rider to continue to build that gap and eventually try to get to the sprint finish. I am in the red jersey today, Global Cycling Network. I usually ride in, I think, a white Trek jersey, but decided to switch it up for this race. As we make our way towards the Innsbruck leg snapper, I have one other Zwift Power win, and it also happened here at Innsbruck. So I definitely enjoy this course. I like that it's flat enough that there's time to recover as we come up to this leg snapper. So this is about a minute climb. I usually jump out of the saddle for the first third of it, then sit back down for a little bit, and then jump out of the saddle once I get towards the top. But I'm really putting in all my effort here. This is the hardest I've ever gone up the leg snapper, which makes sense. We only have to go up it once this race. But really trying to jump out ahead of that group. One guy went early, kind of got his lead there. Me and this other rider are trying to chase him down. But neither of them are the C riders. So the other C rider is still in that group behind me. But I'm continuing to push it. If I can gap that other rider, I would definitely like to do that. But my heart rate's getting high at 194, 195. I'll continue to push it over the top of this hill and then kind of see what happens on the way down. As the descent gets to negative 10%, negative 8%, I kind of start to lay off a little bit. I don't want to use energy that I don't need here, especially if I know a few riders behind are going to catch me no matter what. I think I laid off it a little bit too much. This other rider was able to get into a super tuck. I tried to, but my trainer never really got down to 0 watts. So I think that kind of prevented me from getting into the super tuck. So there's this kind of riser after the downhill. So I begin to up the wattage a little bit. Again, there's no use here in chasing those riders in front of me, as I know they're not in my category. And I also see that this group behind, composed of, I think it's 3 other riders, it looks like, is only a second behind now. So I'm thinking with 1.5 miles left, I won't be able to stay away from them. So it's not really worth it to try to put in that dig to the riders 2 seconds ahead. So watts are still high, but I kind of know in my head that I'm going to get caught by this group behind me at this point. And here we're already starting to think about the finish. So heart rate's still high at 195. As these riders catch on, I'll make sure I up my watts up to 450 just to make sure they don't fly by me. I want to jump on this group. But now everyone will start to recover. Even though there's only 1.5 miles left, it'll kind of slow down a little bit as people start to think about the final sprint. And this final sprint is where the 4th tip will come in. So I know through a lot of my previous Crit City races, I've tried to work on exactly how to time the sprint. And it's really tough. It changes so much from race to race based on how much energy output you have, what you feel like on that day. It varies so much that it's tough to know exactly how much you have and when to go. But I'm feeling pretty decent here. Again, a pretty short race, mile left. So I just want to make sure I give it everything I have. At this point, the 3rd place C rider is 35 seconds behind. So it's S. Hines and I are going for the Cat C win. And as long as I make sure I stay in the group with him, at this point, I'm not looking at the other riders around me. So the 4th tip is really just know your sprint, and it's different for everyone. Some people enjoy going maybe half a mile out and trying to catch some of the riders off guard. Some are very good at putting out an extreme high power output, but for a short period of time, so they may go later. And it really varies race to race based on what the other riders do. So at this point, I just want to make sure that I stay on Heinz's wheel so that he doesn't start sprinting ahead of me. I'm very closely watching the right-hand side and his watts per kilogram. A lot of times if you see that jump into the orange color, even before you see his rider start to accelerate, I would be able to tell that he's starting to sprint. So it's just me and him now. The other B rider, we let get off the front. And I'm trying to just stay on his wheel, trying to see when he's going to go, thinking that I have the energy to get there. The heart rate's down to 190, so I've recovered a little bit, but it's still pretty high. I also don't want to wait too long to start this sprint. So we're at 0.3 miles left, just starting to think of when to go. I'm at 150 watts and even kind of passing him. So we kind of both let off. Neither of us went extremely early. And again, back on his wheel, 0.2 miles left. So we're getting kind of to crunch time. It's about time to go. Still, both of us are holding off, and immediately I see his watts get up. I see it quickly, so I immediately step on it, and I'm able to gap him. So I think he kind of went early, tried to catch me off guard. I immediately stepped on the pedals the second I saw his watts get high, and I was able to come away with the Cat C win. So yeah, I was really happy with that result. Again, it wasn't a crazy fast race. It was a small group of C's, quick race, but a win's a win, and I hope you can take something away from these 4 tips on how to race short races in Zwift. I hope you enjoyed. Yeah, can't wait to see you on the next one. This is Cadman Cycling. Bye.